Hey YouTube, how you all going? I've been meaning to do this video for a while now, but just with coming back from America and kind of getting back into work and everything like that, I haven't had a chance. So I hope this video is a bit helpful because I'm going to be covering things that I would do differently or equipment that I'd change if I was to do World's Toughest Mudder all over again. Now, just in general, everything I took worked reasonably well. There was nothing that really failed drastically. So if you're looking for an overview of all the equipment, just look back at my previous videos. There's two parts where I discuss everything that I took. The first thing I want to talk about is my tent. I know it doesn't seem like a very, I guess, key piece of equipment, but my tent and a lot of other tents out there were, just a simple standard two-person dome tent. When you came in after a lap, and especially when I was changing out of my wetsuits, it was extremely hard to do so in such a small space, especially when you had a whole heap of gear, around the outskirts of the tent inside. I did, however, see people who had like a tall two-person tent where you could essentially stand up. Now, I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but if I was to go again, I'd certainly go for a tent that, once set up, allows you to at least stand and kind of bend over or stand fully upright. When I was taking off my wetsuit and putting it on, you're kneeling and you're kind of struggling to get in and out of it, and on a couple of occasions, your muscles started to cramp because you were putting a bit of weird pressure on it. Luckily, that was the only time I ever felt my muscles cramp or anything like that, and it was just a matter of kind of standing up. It also meant that I to put the whole wetsuit on, like to zip it up at the back, I had to go out of my tent and expose myself to a bit of cold. So ideally, if you could avoid that, it would be good. The second piece of equipment that I'm glad I took, but also that let me down somewhat, was my hydration backpack. This really allowed me to kind of keep up with my nutrition, and I'm really glad that I did use this. Also, if you've kind of read my blog, at one stage on lap 4 I got a whole heap of mud in my eyes and I couldn't open them, and it was only because I had water in this that I was able to kind of get that mud out of my eyes and keep going. I think that was on one of the swamp obstacles, forget the name, log, bog, swamp, whatever it was. The thing that I would change, however, is I'd have 2 or 3 of these. Now, the reason why is the zip got clogged with mud, and especially on lap 4 and early in the morning on lap 5, sometimes I couldn't even open the zip. It was just that full of crap. I had to kind of wait until I went through a water obstacle before the water would wash away enough mud that I would be able to open it. So I wouldn't want, you to rely on one hydration backpack and have the zip jam and then never be able to open it, even after you go through the water. And just for ease of use, and if you're trying to maintain a good speed, it's going to be handy if you can kind of unzip quicker. The other thing you could do is, if you had 2 or 3 of these, is you could have 2 laps worth of food in each. So essentially, instead of having to stop at your tent, to reload the backpack, you just pick up the next one and off you go again. Cut down on the time that you spend in your tent. The third thing I'm going to talk about is my compression gear. It worked really well. I'm glad I had it. The only problem was I only had one pair of the real thermal compression gear, and I changed into that on lap, at the start of lap, Start of lap 4, that's right, when I put on my thicker wetsuit. I did lap 4 wearing it, but when I came back to the tent, I had to have a rest. My body wouldn't let me push on beyond that at that stage, so I did decide to rest for a little bit. As a result, I took off my wetsuit and I took off my compression gear. I put it in a bag, which I definitely recommend. It helps keep it warm but still wet, whereas if you just left it out, it could freeze over. And in fact, I left just the bib. Obviously, I didn't put that in the bag, and even with the bib in my tent, it still froze. The only issue was, when I woke up in the morning, I had to put on wet clothes. It wasn't too much of an issue, but I would say if you had an extra pair of compression gear, you could at least put those on first and they'd be warm. And then when you step outside your tent to kind of put on that last bit of your wetsuit, at least you're not getting cold. And you won't feel, the cold wetsuit directly against your skin. That would help you, I guess, as well if you only had like one wetsuit and you just had multiple layers of this. If you did want to take your wetsuit on and off, that would keep you obviously a little bit warmer as well there. I was able to get around it a little bit on lap 5 because I did have a thin pair of summer compression pants, so I actually put those on first and then my wet compression thermals. I just think that, that would be a little bit of a morale booster and kind of keep you going. Instead of having to put on wet clothes, you're able to put on, something that's dry. The third thing is, if your budget allowed it, I would have 3 wetsuits. As I said, the way around that would maybe be to have an extra pair of compression stuff anyway, just so you don't put that wetsuit back on direct skin. But ideally I'd have 3, and the way I'd look at it is I'd have the 3-2, which I ran with for laps 1, 2 and 3. However, I'd change into my 4-3 1 lap sooner. So I'd go the 3-2 for laps 1 and 2, the 4-3 for laps 3, 4, and obviously depending on how many laps you're aiming to go, that middle session, so 3, 4, 5, 6 if you're obviously getting towards the pointy end. And maybe a backup 4-3 if you do need to rest during the night, so that when you get up again in the morning you can put on another fresh wetsuit that's nice and warm, or have a thicker wetsuit in case the temperatures do go kind of extreme and weigh against you and you're really feeling the cold. Something a little bit thicker that you wear just during that night stretch from say 10 p.m. through to about 3 or 4 in the morning, and then you've got all the bases there covered. So that's just a couple of the things that I would change in terms of my gear for the world's toughest mudder. Let us know your thoughts, if you change anything, what worked, what didn't work, as always, guys. And please rate, comment, subscribe. Really appreciate your feedback. Thanks very much.